I like the fixer in Birmingham, do you know?
Hook us up.
I mean, could you introduce me?
Yeah.
That would be nice.
Yeah, actually, I was with them on Friday afternoon.
Demanding so early in the morning.
Is it still James and...
James and Roisin's our executive producer, yeah. But yeah, no, it's good. Very good at the moment.
So yeah, it's great to meet you all. And I want to start just by asking you to firstly introduce yourselves one by one and what your business is in the arts, how you got into it, and what you're doing now.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay, you're going to start on your left.
I'm going to start on my left.
That would be me then,
So,
wouldn't
right,
it?
I'm going to go clockwise.
So my name's Gary Topp. I'm the relatively new director of this new collaboration organisation in the city called Culture Central, which is all of the major arts organisations coming together, but with the idea that actually it's a voice for the whole of the cultural sector of the city. So that's great, new city for me, but I'm an expert in culture and cities. How did I get into it? Started life as a visual arts curator, long time ago now, and I've done this kind of work actually in the northeast, in the north, Yorkshire and in Australia. So great to be here.
I'm Lara Ratnaraja. I'm a wearer of many hats. But I think for the purpose of today, I am a freelance consultant in arts, culture and heritage and digital, which is kind of my speciality area. I work freelance in Birmingham, in Yorkshire, because we've just discovered we have mutual colleagues, and on a number of national programmes. I also am the Senior Research Facilitator for the Digital Humanities Hub at the University of Birmingham, and that's running a lot of collaborative projects between culture, heritage, digital and academics, both at Birmingham and other universities. And I actually got into the arts, actually years ago, my dad taking me to BMAG to see the Pre-Raphaelites when I was about 10 or 11 years old. And professionally, I actually started on an arts board about 17 years ago. And it lured me in and hasn't spat me out yet, so...
My name's Dan Burwood. I'm a photographer, an artist, and we sort of set up a project called Some Cities, which is to do with... it's a kind of participatory photography project that aims to kind of be a platform for thinking about and representing the city, I guess. So we commission artists, we put publications out, have exhibitions, we run training, we work with community organisations, we work with institutional partners. And in a way it's a kind of an extension of my business partner Andrew Jackson's kind of thinking about the city, and it comes from our own practice as documentary photographers, I guess.
Nice. I'm Yinka Danmole. I am a designer. I've got an architectural background, so my interest is largely within the kind of public spaces and developing interventions within public spaces, especially. I've had quite an interest in how we kind of look at the city and the city centres, especially, and how we redefine that, and how do we look to somewhat bring in culture in towards the city centre, because as visitors visiting the centre, not many of us really get to experience, visitors don't really get to experience the real culture of Birmingham, and it's kind of, I don't know, infiltrated by other things essentially. But on the other side, I'm also a creative producer, working in organisations like Creative Black Country, and in my role there, working with kind of community groups on the ground in the Black Country to develop more engagement within the arts within that area as well. So.
Wow, what a cool mix of people. I'm Tessa Burwood from Professional Incredibles. We produce events that draw people together from all walks of life to celebrate and affect change in their communities. Our major project is the cultural exchange between Birmingham and Brazil called Brum Spirit, which we started in 2011. And I came into the arts through languages and journalism, and latterly I've been studying law alongside running my business, because I wanted to bring that knowledge for the creative industries and for people in general into what I do. So now I also advocate at Birmingham Community Law Centre with asylum seekers, other people subject to immigration orders, and people in pursuit of legal aid. Yeah, that's me.
Interesting. I forgot to add myself to that list as well. So I'm a jazz musician, an MC, and I curate a festival here in Birmingham called the Flyover Show. And it's interesting just listening to all of you. It sounds like we all collaborate across different silos, both you know, different art forms, in terms of different industries as well. The first discussion point, and it'd be nice to get a healthy back and forth. Can you give some examples of the extent to which you or your organisations incorporate collaboration or strategic partnerships in your practice? I'll repeat the question. Please give examples of the extent to which you or your organisations incorporate collaboration or strategic partnerships in your practice.
I guess it depends on what we mean by collaboration, right? What does collaboration mean to everybody? Like,
I mean, you could say at this level, this is a form of collaboration, the communication, but doesn't it imply some sort of sharing and common building, if that's the case?
But I think it depends on, I agree with Tessa, it's different things. So professionally, I could say I have, I work pretty much over everything I do at the university is collaborative. Both internally within the university, obviously, because we work across lots of different schools, but also that's across different sectors. So bringing academics and arts and heritage organisations together, it is collaborative, and we're looking specifically at research that has impact and benefit on both academia and the arts. So it's very much about, you know, I say big picture stuff, I suppose. And over half my freelance stuff is, you know, with stakeholders and partners and funders, and so it's, you know, if I did my list of my collaborators, it's quite big, but also it's just people that I have a copy with. And the reason I like collaborating is sometimes it's just an idea, or somebody rang me up somebody rang me up before I got in the car and asked me, because they had a project, they were looking for some artists, could they kind of push that opportunity to me, because I have a big network of artists that we're working with on a programme at the moment. And obviously the answer is yes. So is that collaboration or is that collaboration? So well, for me, it's all scales of things, isn't it?
Broadening it out, really, absolutely. Yeah. But Gary, I'm also interested because I know that your organisation follows on the heels from a predecessor, which would involve, I think, Birmingham Symphony Hall, Town Hall, BRB, a number of different organisations who came together both to pool resources and to make art more impactful across the city. So how does that work for you?
Yeah, so look, Culture Central is by definition a collaborative vehicle. It is about recognising that if you bring lots of exceptional things together, you create a space for more exceptional things. So when I talk about collaboration or partnership, which I think we just use habitually actually in the arts because it's what we do, then actually I think the more interesting bit of it for me is that people can talk about collaboration and partnership as if it's about shared services or, yeah, that's nice, we could work together, we've got some common aims. I actually think that collaboration, and certainly this is behind the Culture Central vision, is actually about creating a new kind of space for pushing the boundaries, for making innovations happen. Yeah. So it's not just about getting on well, it's about doing things better and different. And actually when you ramp that up, and it was great to hear everybody talk about cities as we introduced ourselves, when you ramp that up into the city scale, you end up with something that is, you know, to be slightly poetic, I think is absolutely the heart of the human condition right now, 2016. Cities are our defining thing, and cities are by definition a very collaborative space. You know, the city as an organism has to be collaborative to work well. And then you throw culture and creativity into that, you've got a world-class city.
So that's the statistic, roughly, that more humans now live in cities than anywhere else in the world.
50%,
right?
at the moment, 75% of the world's population will live in cities, probably within our lifetimes.
I'm also keen to maybe break the comfy consensus where it might be that cities are obviously great places where people meet and collaborate. There are also places of great inequality often, and differences in provision, artistic provision. How do you propose overcoming some of those?
I think you have to be brave and make quite disruptive interventions in order to break those kind of norms. You know, if you look at Birmingham as a city, it's a really consumer-focused city. Like, we have a massive shopping centre at the heart of our city. And when I started, I came through live music, and live music would be about having a venue where they want to sell the alcohol, so they let a promoter sell tickets on the door so that people can come in and consume music as audience members. And I feel like the most disruptive interventions are those that break down that fourth wall so that the people that come through the door aren't there as audiences, they're there as participants. And then even more disruptive than that is when the venue and the geographical area of where that event is taking place is also brought up into like the momentum of the process. So that could mean anything, like job creation for people that don't have jobs in their area. It could be language learning for people that don't speak English, or language learning for those that want to learn the other languages in their area. And it becomes part of a more kind of holistic approach. So I feel like there's a lot of interesting things like that going on in Birmingham and in other places, in Brazil for sure right now, and I feel like it's a political act if you want to truly be collaborative.
How did that work for you in Brazil? Again, that's a place that's very stratified in terms of wealth and opportunity. How did you manage to use collaboration to overcome those things, or not?
Brazil's a really interesting place in terms of cultural production, because they've had a law in place, well, until recently, because there's a coup going on right now. They've had a law in place since 1991 that gives a tax break to any business that invests in culture at their discretion. And because it's kind of part of the soft power politic of pushing Brazil as a brand, people would think, and we certainly, were part of a group of people that maybe had this assumption before we went on tour around Brazil for the first time, that it's somewhere where it's easier to make culture happen, because the infrastructure's there. But it's just like anywhere, it's like pure chaos, And I think the thing is that, wherever you go in the world, wherever you're going to be working, if you're on tour or something, the way to really make stuff happen is by concentrating on those person-to-person relationships that take you through the process, and that's what collaboration is, at its simplest form.
I think also it's not collaborating with the same people that are just like you. You don't collaborate with your mirror image, because there's, sometimes I think when we talk about collaboration, we're collaborating together in a kind of nice homogenous group of people that know the answers, and then we're going to do it at people who maybe need help, and that's absolutely not the way to do it at all. But come back to you, about having that space where you can also choose not to collaborate. I don't think it's an either or. There are things that I just do by myself in my freelance career, because it fits that. But on the whole, I prefer to collaborate because I find it more inspiring to work with people that kind of think differently to me. Because I'm always right, and I like to have sometimes people point that, But it's good. I think we were talking about being complacent. I think you have to challenge yourself with your thinking, and
you're kind of preempting the next part of this discussion.
I've run a big project on collaboration, so I could do the research.
There you go.
I was going to say the other aspect of it is sort of interdisciplinary kind of stuff. Like you're saying, we I run some cities, which is a kind of platform for kind of photographers to kind of collaborate, but also to build a kind of a vision that's beyond the vision of an individual. And I think traditionally photographers don't tend to kind of collaborate that well. The idea of the kind of lone photographer kind of documenting things and bringing them back to show people and stuff is a kind of pervasive. But some of the most interesting things we've done have been working with urban geographers who are sort of thinking about the city or thinking about the same things about the city, but from a different direction. That's been really important for us in strategically in terms of how we kind of how we can leverage kind of funding and kind of get exposure to with different kinds of audiences, because I think if you're thinking about if you have a question in mind rather than thinking, right, I want to make an artwork that's this, I think we've sort of come in a research kind of way, we're coming from it the other way around, and that's just the way
in different audiences that otherwise in your side.
Yeah, totally, and it works the other way for the for the academics who then get their work exposed to kind of arts audiences, and then it's a sort of that's a really fertile ground for kind of for collaboration. But then at the same time, that comes from relationships you have with individuals. Do you know what I mean? So I photographed somebody's wedding years ago, and it turned out we were, thinking about the city in kind of convergent ways, and he was an academic and I'm a photographer, and years down the line, it turns into sort of something else in a different context,
I think the interesting point that Lara raises also is that if you're only working with people perhaps culturally or artistically or in a similar world to you, that can have an impact on the type of work that's being produced, and vice versa. If you have quite a broad base, then that's going to affect the output of work. My next question, I'll probably ask you, Yinka, because I think you might have a strong opinion perhaps. Too much collaboration can lead to homogeneity in our arts. Distance from others and from the mainstream is a catalyst to originality. Discuss.
Surely it's going to have a bit of diversity in it. It's going to breed more diversity, because as more you collaborate with different people, the more different ideas come about, essentially, rather than the same old ideas from the same old organisations working in the same old silos. So I would say surely there's some room from difference
I
and
can
kind of
see it from an artistic perspective myself, that sometimes things become orthodoxies, where there are so many people collaborating in the same space on the same stages that there starts to become conventions and things that people conform to in order to perceive success. Whereas, you know, the implications of this question is if people just operated on their own a bit more, had a bit more independence, then maybe the work that's produced would be more diverse or more impactful.
more there has some kind of individuality to it, essentially.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I guess with everything, there's always got to be a balance some ways, in terms of, again, like Lara said, she likes just working on her own, and kind of then there's time for collaborating, there's time for not collaborating, maybe, I guess is a kind of my feedback to that.
So you're talking about like the idea that if people collaborate too much and they're just inward facing with each other, then things can become derivative of each other and it's a reductive process. Is that what you're talking about?
That's a discussion point, frankly.
I
also think that maybe the context for that collaboration is really important.
You have to respond
if
to
it's
where
been
you
facilitated,
are, sure.
it's somebody else who wants to discuss the sort of paternalistic idea that, you know, we have all this imbibed knowledge that we're going to impart to the unwashed masses of Castle Vale or Handsworth.
I didn't quite phrase it like that.
Yeah, well, I'll paraphrase it for you. But you know, we're gonna teach Castle Vale or Handsworth how to do art because they haven't got a clue.
For me, like, I'm really passionate about the arts being useful, you know, and for example, I work in audience development, so I'll go into a venue or a new organisation and they've just landed in an area and they're like, we want people to come inside, we want people to come and consume our art. And I'm like, okay, the first thing you need to do is like an asset map of the area, see what's around you, and then you work on responding to local need, right? Because there's no point in saying, but look, we've got this wonderful exhibition, look at all the beautiful pictures in this room, if the people outside the door are like, I can't even read what this is about, I don't get benefits because I'm an asylum seeker, or I've got to get my kids to school, you know.
So how removed is this artistic provision from the people?
And it's interesting to think about the fact that, you know, going back to Brazil now, the new interim regime that's come in, which is all, incidentally, old white men for the first time since 1979, definitely not responding to context, definitely not collaborative. They've extinguished the Ministry for Culture alongside the Ministry for Human Rights.
I've just seen on Twitter that they've reinstated it.
The reason they've reinstated it is because the people occupied all of the headquarters for culture, because it meant so much to them. They wouldn't have done that if it was just about culture being something that happens in silos, you know.
Absolutely. We've got to move on. Unfortunately, we'll hold the points. I'm sure you can inveigle it in there, crowbar in there somewhere. On cooperation, so the rise of global interconnectivity through the web and social media has refined the notion of the arts community. Do you agree? And if so, what are the future implications of this trend to Birmingham's artists and arts organisations?
Blimey. We just had a bunch of work, including some city stuff, and some things by Break Mission and Jungo Arts and Hoaxer, Birmingham-based artists, included in an exhibition in Sao Paulo. And we sent them online, you know. It would have been impossible to do that by sending it in a ship, you know, in a container for 6 weeks.
And it's instantaneous now.
It's
in a way that
instantaneous.
it wasn't you know,
it was exhibited at the Memorial of Latin America, and it's all just because of the internet that was possible.
Do you feel that that artist in Sao Paulo that you're working with is more kindred than the guy in Harborne?
But
you live in the same city.
You're in a digital economy. It's global automatically. Yeah. You're connected. I find it really reductive when people say, "I would like to tour internationally. I'd like to trade internationally." You know, I work in this country. I have partners that are in the States who I've never met. Even if these people are really more connected than they ever have been, would you consider them, in some senses, like there's an artistic hub in Moseley or Handsworth or whatever?
I think you know, obviously there's sort of, you know, global interconnectivity through the internet. So I'm going to show in Korea, like, with people I'll probably never meet in October, right? And that's all happened, you know, online. But those relationships were fostered face to face, you know. So I think that the idea that there's a sort of, you know, digital communities can kind of supplant or replace kind of face-to-face sort of geographical communities is misplaced. But I think there are kind of enhancements to kind of both on the ground and kind of virtual ones. I think these things work best when they're both.
So if you look at some of the major galleries in London, their online audience will probably never visit them. Does that mean that's not valuable?
You raise an interesting duality as well. We're talking about audiences on the one hand and also practitioners on the other. And if, as practitioners, you consider yourself part of a global village and artistic community, or whether it's just about the delivery of art and that artistic community is global and smaller. You see what I mean?
Professionally, I don't think of myself just within a Birmingham community, but then I think European. I think in a European context, and I think in an international context anyway, because you want to work with the people that are doing interesting work. So the easiest thing now is, so some of our partners are in the States that we work with academically, and because they're doing research in these areas or they are producing work in those areas, and that's really
the way
fascinating.
it works, certainly for me, and to others chime in or disagree, but my appeal largely when I'm touring in New York or elsewhere is that this is a window into something authentically Birmingham. It's that whole localized way of viewing the world, that actually I'm authentically, I come out of a musical tradition that includes Steel Pulse and, Lady Leisha as well as myself. So that's what I want to sell to the world, and that's what I think the world's interested in, as well as just kind of me, the individual.
To link the question before about homogeneity as well. So in some ways we live in, because of digital connectivity, because of aeroplanes actually as well, we live in the most homogenous world that we've ever lived in. But that does mean that you've got this huge appetite for the authentic, for that sense of where you can, and it is sometimes authentic because of place, as in geography, your urban geographers, but sometimes it's authenticity because of a community of practice that may not be geographically linked. But this really important role that the arts plays in kind of slightly defeating homogeneity in some sense, because it always has to be the space that says, if that's the norm, we're just going to play with the edges of it a little bit and push it out. But it has to come from somewhere in order for it not to just be free-floating or disconnected in some way.
But if you look at all the festivals like yourself and B Festival and Supersonic and Flatpack, and these all work with international artists. And what I love is exactly what you said, is they're taking Birmingham as a geographical space and taking it back out there, but they're bringing artists in and they're really open to that nature of international collaboration. And I love, if you look at those festivals, most of their audience are not just Birmingham, they have increasingly international audiences, but some of that will be online, and I think that's really important as well. So it's not an either or thing, but that you can, B Festival, all of the artists are international. They're all European artists coming into the city, meeting new people, taking that back out again. And I think that's where Birmingham's particularly unique. We have all these great independent festivals. They all collaborate with each other. They programme across each other. Yep. And that's taken a long time to get to where we are. And when I go outside Birmingham, that's one of the things that gets picked up the most with arts communities I work with outside the city or outside this region is, how did that all happen? And that's kind of because people had actually probably financially had to collaborate, but now what I love is artistically they're collaborating. But I do think I'm really now beginning to be more interested in how global communities can engage with work online, which they will never physically see. But
sorry, I'm going to have to be a tougher chair now, but flying through time. I know, this is my first chairing gig, so I'm going to start being really rude now. Strategic partnerships allow grassroots organisations to punch above their weight and to compete with NPOs, National Portfolio Organisations. Ooh. Do you agree?
I hate everything about that sentence.
Yes,
so let somebody else go.
Let's start again. Strategic go.
I think it sets up a false. I understand that within a sophisticated cultural or arts economy, that there is some notion that a few organisations are more worthy than others. But we are rapidly moving through that process, aren't we? Yeah. We might argue it's not rapid enough.
One would hope so. There's a subtle implication, as you say, in the question, that you don't need to be an NPO. If you just pool your resources, little minnows, then maybe you'll be like the NPOs one day.
Yeah, and the implication that we should be, it's a competition, like NPOs should should kind of be given forward anyway, in that sense, that sort of trying to support the kind of wide, because it's in everybody's interest, if there's a sort of diverse offer, then more people will come in and there's a more, a larger and more diverse audience.
It makes it all about funding as well. There's no art in any of that sentence.
No,
exactly. If I was to be provocative, I think a lot of where the conversation around cooperation falls flat is because it needs brass tack things like funding discussions to be decided or to be planned out. And organisations have all these lofty ideas about collaborating, but they never actually get down to sharing their databases or sharing their resources. So
I'm just thinking about something that's happened this year with a company that I'm on the board of. I've been involved in quite a long, drawn-out contractual negotiation that they asked me to come in on. They're an independent small company, and it was with an MPO, and it was because the MPO really wanted some of what they had and had called them into meetings, and then they'd gone into the meetings and felt like maybe intimidated, but also like that it wasn't necessarily a transparent conversation. So they asked me to come in, perhaps to kind of level the playing field a little bit because of my legal knowledge and those kind of things. And the things we were fighting for exactly were like to respect, the need to be paid, and to respect the need for some kind of artistic independence in terms of what was produced. So in that sense, that was my company joining with another company in order to level the playing field. But it was still across this dynamic of vulnerability, so it's that emotional and precarious labour that we were talking about.
Yeah, and it's kind of sad because lofty, just the nature of the collaboration before, we were easy to wax lyrical about it. We could share this and share that, but often I've seen it fall down in the delivery. So we've charged ourselves huge consultancy fees because we're the big fish.
But I'd be more concerned actually, not about even the smaller independent arts organisations that you're talking about, because I work with all those as well, and the NPOs, and wait till everyone's in the NPO gang, and because people seem to forget the arguments they had 3 years previously, and I think I've got a really long corporate memory, and I remember everything everyone says, but I'm actually more concerned where funding does have an impact isn't on that level, because I'm freelance, I get called and asked to loads and loads of things which I'm not in a paid relationship for. If I'm interested, I'll do it. If I'm not, I won't. But it's actually people that are emerging, and that infrastructure does not include any of them. So how do they even how do they even know what an NPO is? How do they even begin to enter that conversation? And I think sometimes there needs to be a greater generosity to allow people to move up and sideways or round or whatever it is, because they're not in that discussion. And when you look at the collaboration we're talking about and cooperation, we're still talking about a group of people that are all very fairly informed, or they know to pick the phone up and who to talk to bring that in. And actually, I'd be more interested to see, obviously, people that are not in that conversation. How do we find avenues and routes in for them? Because in the next 15 years, culture is going to change again, audiences are going to change again. And I think doing the same old is a bit...
Absolutely.
I would say collaboration, the reason it's worked for me is it's completely changed where my interests are professionally in the last 3 years, and I wouldn't have had that as a result of that. And those opportunities should be available to everyone, not just those in the discussion.
Do you feel that process is widening, has widened over the past 20 years, has become more narrow? I personally would feel that there have been huge opportunities 20, 15 years ago, and things are becoming in some ways more sclerotic, less open to collaboration in some ways, apart from you, Gary.
Well, it's interesting that, so, Culture Central has been invented in some way in this city by the MPOs to do exactly what we're talking about, to say, actually, we recognise the landscape's changing massively. We recognise we're part of a city ecology, and that we want to learn and find new ways of working with it in different ways. So sometimes just creating a vehicle, Culture Central, and saying it's to address the change that needs to happen, is actually in itself a positive statement. So I would feel that it's less sclerotic in that sense, but we also have to recognise that we are in an age of austerity right now, and that actually we have this kind of challenge of shifting availability of resources, by which I mean there's not necessarily less, they're just in different places. And so some of those old models are going to have to move. I still think actually that we're being a bit gentle about recognising just how fast things have already moved and are going to move, and because I'm an optimist, I think that that will be the vehicle by which a lot of the innovations that we want to have happen will be made to have happen. Yep.
I can't believe you've just said the word austerity with like 12 minutes to go. That's like a whole like other political debate about like an ideology that
Well, I
doesn't
think it's
necessarily...
I mean, it's one of the things that I think a lot of, you know, this sort of, you were saying about art that does stuff, you know, I think there's an interesting, I think that the kind of, you know, one of the things that austerity has made people do is look for collaborations that will facilitate, you know, allow them to do things, but finding people to do things with it's sort of serving another purpose. And I think, you know, on the upside, you know, apart from all of the kind of downsides of this, the upside is that there is a kind of a focus on, you know, for me, I mean, a sort of, you know, social kind of value of art and you know, what is the, you know, a sort of reassessment of the kind of value of culture as a place. And I think, and that's sort of, you know, it probably wouldn't have, it's not something that I would have imagined predicting a few years ago.
But that breaks down the homogeneity, I can never say that. Blandness. And, you know, whilst I'd rather not have austerity, the point is, in times of challenge, people should, it should drive change. And I think, this is going to happen without people's permission, put it that way. The revolution will not be televised, it might be digitised, however.
11.5 minutes, 11 minutes and 10 seconds. What advice can you, anyone, offer to artists and art organisations in forging and making the best use of collaborative relationships? Are there any pitfalls to be avoided?
I really think it's about, for me, when I look to collaborate with someone else, I look at what's the value in what the offer is from them, essentially. And I think that's what's really important, understanding that you both, or whoever partners are, got different values and inputs, and understanding where that comes together. So for instance, when I did a project back in 2014, I had two artists who I worked with in kind of producing some work, and one was a fashion designer and one was a kind of fine artist, video maker, and you know, these two just would never have met together essentially to kind of form some kind of project essentially, but they did. But what was really beautiful about what the output of it was one of the artists who was the fashion designer kind of created a screen through kind of a fabric making textile technique essentially, and then the digital artist kind of projected onto this. And again, for me, that's a beautiful kind of summary for me of what and how beautiful kind of collaboration can be, because it took his...
They're mutually expedient in terms of practice as well. Learning something.
It took his work from being a flat screen object to being this kind of 3D form, essentially. And I think for me, again, it's about understanding the values and what the partners bring to the table. And then for me, that's when the kind of outcome of collaboration can really be quite powerful, essentially.
What you've got right there is a contract, right? So you're looking at value and consideration. And I mean, that's going back to your question, that's the advice that I would give. I'd say yes to going and having conversations with people. Always bear in mind, what are you getting in return for your effort? Or what are they going to be getting in return for what you're asking for? And I think if you try to maintain that balance, then you're going to make loads of mistakes anyway, but at least you're going to feel like you're being dignified about it, you know? And you're learning as you go.
For young artists and people who perhaps in positions where they're described as disadvantaged or disaffected, that automatically sets up power relations that are quite unhelpful for young artists. And if you, as you both said, really are aware that you're bringing something to the table, then that doesn't open you up to that sort of abuse. Final, more or less, question. Can we use collaboration in an effort to brand Birmingham as a global city with a worthy arts and cultural offering? That's a rhetorical question if I've ever heard one.
So the answer,
if that's not already your life's work.
Yeah, I was going to say that feels.
Can we use collaboration? I'm setting you up for it.
We have to. There's a lovely. Every city has lots of strategies, doesn't it? And quite a lot of them say exactly the same thing, actually. Yeah, it doesn't matter whether you're in Brazil or Australia or South Africa. But there's a lovely line in the Birmingham ones about young, digital and diverse, which feels to me like a very powerful statement about the identity of this city. And it's a nice starting point as somebody relatively new. Keep going, okay, if that's what the uniqueness, the authenticity of this place might be based on, then how do we tell that story better through what we all do? Why does that matter? Because we do live in a world of global cities now, and Birmingham City Region at 5 million people is by any definition a global scale city that's got an amazingly powerful story to tell that we all have to be part of, don't we? Yeah. And it will matter.
But I think if you're concentrating on what you're doing, if it is value driven and you know, you're creating something and it happens to be in Birmingham, then you don't necessarily have to consciously be thinking about how does this make Birmingham look for it to become part of that brand if those in charge of branding
it. It's part of that story.
Yeah. Exactly.
But I think brand, I mean, this is an ongoing argument about Birmingham branding, which happens in every city, and I'm not even going to get into it, because I think people forget that it's not just for them, and it's for the rest of the world. But I actually think it's like, I won't get onto the word diversity because I will be here forever, but actually it's plurality is my new word, because it's about art form, it's not something for everyone and really, let's like reduce it. It is actually that there is an excellence of practice, there's an excellence of artists, there's diverse audiences, and that's what you want in a global city. Yeah. You know, that isn't a homogenised culture at all. And I think, you know, the fact that, you talk about multidisciplinary working or interdisciplinary working, that's kind of what, for me, young, digital and diverse means. It doesn't mean, I know some people would make that so reductive about, it's about young people, it's about people from ethnic minorities, and it's about stuff online.
Well, just to throw a spanner in the works, a lot of cities use the arts to rebrand themselves, and rightly. I mean, we've got all sorts of fantastic traditions that couldn't exist anywhere else in the country. The problem is that if you're really listening to the arts, it sometimes says some very challenging things back at you. You know, Hands Off Revolutions wasn't just a nice album. It told you what the issue was with being a young African black person in Birmingham, and all these issues that are still here. And
that's why it travelled so far.
Absolutely, that's why it's still so relevant, because of its honesty. And if people confront the arts in a way that's not, this is great, it's young and diverse, then it might be some more challenging things for.
That's about the organisations, not the offer, by the way. I think there are. I'm going to be really careful how I put that, but I think actually this is what I mean about where are the younger voices, where is the plurality of voices, which is not just the same people talking about it, and it might be things that are uncomfortable, it might be things that are wrong or right, whatever. Just have more voices, and you can, you know. And I think when you're looking at collaboration, you do it with audiences and with communities. You don't do it at people, and I think that's where the shift is going to happen. And when I say it's going to happen without your permission, it will happen without, not yours, but it will happen without people's permissions. Because I've got, on the programme that I run with Helga, the Represent programme, we've got a network of 35 artists all collaborating with it on their own. Yeah. We just provided the platform and the space, and they are now working together. Most of them absolutely felt excluded from the networks within this city. And I think that what's really interesting is they're now working together, and they are fairly socially engaged about things. So, you know, we have a close Facebook group. They share things around Cultural Central now. They were never on that mailing list. They were never on that audience. They're all sharing the Birmingham Cultural Investment Inquiry. They're coming to things. They go to each other's work. This is going to happen when people like it.
To be honest, it takes people like you to make that happen. I'm still not on some mailing list. There are some people who aren't. And I think that problem is, in some sectors of this city, actually getting much worse.
I probably agree with that.
I think I mean, you know, I don't know, it's a sort of slightly, the kind of marketing question, I think is, you know, for me, I've always thought about this, especially with Birmingham, it's this sort of, it's, you know, forget the marketing, like, make spaces for really interesting things to happen. And then you don't, you know, the marketing is really easy because you know, one, it will happen by its own because people are doing these things on a global scale or on a global kind of platform anyway. And two, you know, the stories will emerge and there'll be a kind of a massive diversity of things to talk about, and that those stories tell themselves. Do you know what I mean? Rather than sort of thinking, right, we're going to call it like, I don't know, you know, Grand Central Birmingham, whatever. You know, like that was a weird, weird example, but yeah, I think that there's, and I think that this has happened, you know, for many years. This has happened kind of in spite of sort of marketing conversations. Do you know what I mean? You know, and like you know, the kind of, you look back sort of 15, 20 years when, you know, the way that things have changed sort of dramatically. And that's kind of because, you know, people have fought to make spaces for themselves to do things, which I mean. So I think making, you know, however you define the word space, you know, I think that's a sort of, you know, an
and I think those physical spaces are quite important. My favourite space in Birmingham is BOM. So,
yeah,
you know,
I was going to say, Birmingham Open Media is an amazing example.
You have academics, you have scientists, you have... and again, these things are happening without people's permissions. It tells a story. It tells the story of a city. It's young, it's digital, it's diverse. But it's also changing art form and practice, and it's changing academics. And I think those sort of spaces are. You can't just create lots of bombs. It happened because Karen drove it, and it responded to the city, and the city responded to her. it's even more exciting to see what comes next. You know, what will the next physical or virtual space be? And I think that will come from different groups of people.
Yeah. Just to throw a little question out there, so do you think this is where cities are going wrong in terms of focusing on writing what their brand is or what their narrative is, rather than focusing on individual pockets of
I think
initiatives
a penchant for giving apparently experienced people or heavier institutions the leverage to go and do it on their behalf, as opposed to sponsoring the people in the pockets where it's already happening and celebrating that.
I think that happens in Birmingham. I disagree with that because, you know, Karen has a national and international profile at BOM, as does the CBSA. They're different audiences.
I've never had any press, any media, any TV media at the flyover show. The cameras don't go and the events don't go rolling down there unless it's community outreach, unless it's anti-gun, anti-crime. That's a problem. That's a problem for us that we've got some collective denial about.
So there's this thing about like a consultation fatigue, which like diverse communities, diverse is a horrible word, you know, like Handsworth, like Walsall Heath, are subjected to all the time. People coming in and saying, can we consult with you? Can we bring you
I'm a
something?
professional consultee around diversity and ethnic minorities all the time, as are you. So,
what I was going to say is that, you know, it takes a lot of time and patience to form bonds within the area where you want to work.
It does.
You know, for me, it is Walsall Heath, you know, it's where I live. And that's where I want to see changes being made. And I feel like it can be done properly and it can be done badly. But I think, you know, it's a shame when people who you've been forming those relationships with feel like the end result is that they're used as a poster boy or a poster girl.
Because they are used as poster boys.
Yeah,
Come in, spin on your head. Come in, do some breakdancing, do some urban-y nice pictures that you do. We'll take some photographs, and then that's the end of your collaboration. That's precisely.
And then they
the
go
same
back home
vampiric.
without anything else in their pockets.
Yeah,
and they're left
I've seen
just
that
like, you know.
countless times in the city, and if I wouldn't just make it up. It's still an issue. Moving forward, what meaningful steps will you take in the next year to encourage cooperation between artists and arts organisations? You kind of implied, it's a big one, isn't it? We've implied a lot of things already, which I find interesting. Some of them require more onus on the artist and I guess a perspective, and others in terms of a city attitude. But maybe speaking personally, what will you be doing in the next year to move this agenda forward?
I'm going to be working really, really hard on attempting to make Professional Incredibles and the projects that we deliver more relevant to their context. And we've got kind of quite a horizontal hierarchy. There are lead artists that we work with in different disciplines, and I want to continue to work with them to help them pursue their professional ambitions in a holistic way that also pays attention to where they're coming from. I don't know quite how I'm going to go about doing it, but I'll give it a go.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
I mean, for me, I think from what was just said at the end of that last conversation, I think for me, something I picked up from that is when's the difference between you being used or you just being a collaborator, essentially. And that's something, as I work with lots of young artists, you know, emerging artists, people who want to collaborate with organisations, I really want to pass that message on to look out for this and look at and see there is value in you. You are bringing something to the table as a collaborator, and you're not just being this pawn, or essentially. So that's something I'd like to pass on to people, essentially, I think, from this conversation.
Look, I think that's entirely what Culture Central has to be about.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that, like any new organisation, we have to learn how to do it. Yeah, and when it's an organisation that is born out of other organisations, that's a lot of organisational culture, isn't it? Yeah. So certainly in these first couple of months, for me, I have very deliberate. These are very simple, but it is about humility. It is about learning. It is about reflecting on where we've got to and saying, is that the right place, or can we do more? And it is about actually saying that the interesting space may not be happening often in the main organisations that have sponsored this thing, which is quite an interesting space. I love the tension in that, but they love the tension in it as well. That's why they've created it. You know, so when they get together, they say, actually, you know, there's something, we can do something more interesting here. We've got to learn how to do it. We can only learn how to do it by being humble, by listening, the 2 ears, 1 mouth thing, by doing some projects, getting some stuff wrong, all of that kind of stuff. So I feel like, you know, in that question for me is exactly why I'm so excited to be here. Yeah.
Your optimism is totally rubbing off on me, Gary. I'm like, we can do this.
We can.
Yeah.
We can.
Yeah, no,
We kind
I
of have
hear you,
to.
I hear you. And I think humility is a
Yeah.
very interesting
Yeah.
takeaway from
Because it will
Yeah.
happen. That's
It
what I
will.
like. It will happen.
It will. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
mine's going to be that I'm going to be looking at more. Well, we are developing a number of research projects which are with academics and arts organisations, not just in Birmingham but up and down the country. And thematically, that's kind of I'm much more interested now in looking at engagement and identity and what these things mean. So I tend to look at research that's co-produced with the audiences or communities that we're working with rather than at. I'm not a very at person. And also looking to work more increasingly in European partnerships and again more kind of states-side partnerships because it's more of the same, but actually it's much more curated in terms of the research interests I have, and particularly with some of the work we're looking at with academics and international areas. It's in areas of conflict, so looking at how culture actually helps people revisit their heritage, their history, and start telling stories about their identity through that. Small things, then.
Yeah, just a few minor revolutions.
2018 is the major revolution.
Okay, cool.
What about you, Don?
Yeah, I struggle to answer the question a little bit because I think we're trying to do those things sort of progressively and incrementally, you know, and so it depends what kind of opportunities kind of arise. But I guess from a sort of political perspective, I think that I'm really personally really interested in sort of thinking about the kind of heritage, the historical heritage that that much of our kind of development and privilege kind of is built upon, and the sort of fallout for that politically for people in sort of in conflict situations, like as Lara was saying, I think that sort of Sykes-Picot,
Watch the space.
like I know it's a sort of a different answer to a different question really in a way, but yeah.
No, not really. Did you answer it already?
I answered at the
You
beginning.
did. No, Yinka did, and then I got confused. We've all had things to say. But it's been a really interesting conversation, and one that I think I want to listen back to. I do find the subject, it's resonant for all sorts of reasons. At the extreme end, you do have the scenario where people are in denial about the way they're exploiting sometimes talented pockets of the city and calling it collaboration. But then on the flip side, you have this tremendous opportunity for people to break out of the silos and really discover how vibrant and exciting the city is, and for people to feel that there are no spaces they can't inhabit. That's going to be the biggest challenge, I think, going forward.
I think we're enormously privileged to work in the sector that we work in. I think we should recognise that, and from that comes, for all that it can be stressful, there comes a duty to collaborate in a meaningful way.
Well, you really can't create any kind of meaningful art without some level of collaboration to a certain extent. If you're literally in an ivory tower, it's going to be rubbish. It's
in a cave on a mountain, composing a new piece.
It's going to be a rubbish piece. Take it from me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, cheers everyone. That was really interesting.
That was actually a refreshing conversation to have on a Monday morning.
Yeah.
That's going to set me up for the week.
kind of,
Yeah.
Right, I'm off to the allotment.
No,
Collaborate with some plants.
yeah. What we've got to do is put this all into practice, that's all. Small thing.